or the divorce costs will be pretty small beer in the context of the longer term effects that independence could have on Scotland's budgetary position. So the setup costs that have been talked about range from £200 million to £1.5 billion, depending on who you believe, the yes or the no campaign. But those costs would be paramount in significance compared to the potential longer term costs if Scotland's public finances turn out to be weaker than those in the rest of the UK, which would be the case if Scotland's oil revenues decline in the years ahead.
Now, again, much has been made, particularly by the no side in this, that Scotland, as they would see it, receives more money per head of the population than the rest of the UK in terms of funds from central government. Would that cause problems for the Scottish Government? Would that be a boost to whatever is left of the UK?
Well, indeed. In recent years, government spending in Scotland has been about 12% higher per person than it is in the rest of the UK. Now, it is true that tax revenues are also a bit higher in Scotland because of the oil revenues from the North Sea. But from 2012-13 onwards, the extra tax revenues haven't been high enough to pay for the extra spending. Now, if that continues, that would mean the Scottish government in independent Scotland would have a bigger budget deficit than the UK government, and that could mean a need for kind of higher taxes or lower spending to fill that gap. Now, the Scottish government says it hopes that all revenues will rebound and remain high and fill that gap. But that's a big if. If all revenues don't rebound, they'll be left with a bigger hole to fill, and that could mean more austerity rather than an ending austerity if they voted yes. For the UK, it's not quite such a big issue. Because Scotland's quite a small part of the UK as a whole, there could be a small knock-on effect to the overall finances for the UK, but the issue is much larger for Scotland because all revenues there make up a much bigger part of their budget.
Now, let's pursue the what if there's a no vote scenario. If there's a no vote, the three main political parties say Scotland will have more powers, will have tax-raising powers. What's interesting is they didn't say you can have tax-reducing powers. What's at stake here, do you think? Because that does not give the Scottish government, a future Scottish government, the ability to reduce some taxes, corporation tax or income tax, if it chose to do so.
Well, I think that's not true. I think when they say tax-raising powers, what they mean is that Scotland would have some of the taxes devolved to it and that Scotland would have control over those taxes. So in fact, they actually could decide to cut the Scottish rate of income tax rather than increase it. It's about devolving the tax powers. I think the term tax-raising powers is a little bit misleading. It's the overall tax power. So if they wanted to, they could cut spending and cut taxes. Or if they say they're concerned about the ongoing austerity, they could actually use the powers they've got to increase taxes a bit and then reduce some of the pressures on things like the NHS, on pensions, on public services.
And just a final thought on that. A point that's been made to me by a number of people is, isn't the problem for all governments that they find it very difficult to raise tax from some big multinational corporations anyway? No matter how big you are, there seem to be ways that the biggest companies in the world can avoid paying tax.
Well, indeed, there is potentially a risk of tax competition between the UK and Scotland, whether Scotland becomes independent or not, particularly if something like corporation tax was devolved. If corporation tax was devolved to Scotland or in an independent Scotland and they set different rates, that could mean corporations have an incentive to shift their profits from the rest of the UK to Scotland or vice versa, and that could undermine tax revenues in both countries, leaving less to spend on public services and pensions. So whilst devolution of tax or independence and then the tax powers you get with that can give opportunities, there are also risks as well. Risks that your revenues are undermined as tax competition gives opportunities for avoidance and evasion.
David, thanks very much. David Phillips.